Share here, and I'll do a little refresher first, but I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go to this file, which I think should be visible now. And this is a Excel file that Claire sent out to everyone. And you can use Discover Life. It certainly has this information, but not as detailed. So to repeat what we mentioned last time and just as a little bit of an overview, this Excel spreadsheet includes lots of differences between the species that are on the subtle end because it's a pretty subtle group. So in some cases, you have to weigh a evidence from several different places and look for the best fit based on a line of evidence that matches the best grouping from this list here. Just because it's very difficult to be absolutely black and white about some of these things, but some of the characters are quite nice, but sometimes only at the extremes. So like when you have the depressed apical area, whether it's 60% or 75%, sometimes that's useful, but telling the difference between 60 and 75, unless you have comparative information, is not that great. But it can help when you're trying to evaluate a bunch of different species and different factors. So that's why the spreadsheet is here. What you're looking at is species are rows, characters are columns. There's a little mini explanation of what we mean by the character at the very bottom of each of the character columns. There is a yellow highlighted cell that indicates that that particular character is something that, in combination with the other yellow highlighted characters in that species row, makes it distinctive. In other words, that would be the first, but maybe not the only thing that you would look for if you suspect, oh, this might be Nuda. You would look and see, oh, like the vertex height is pretty short compared to some of the others and so forth. So we went through these in a lot of detail with using Forbesii here as our model child to explain the categories. So we'll go through the rest of the species, but nowhere near that level of detail. If you want that detail, you want more information or examples, I would jump back to the last session once that gets posted. And if you missed it, Claire mentioned there were some problems with things getting posted, but it's on the mend. Okay, so Ceanothene tends to be a northern species, and I'm going to show that here. Oops, sorry. When you click on the species name, it will now jump to the species page on Discover Life. Handy, but not what we wanted to do here. So take it back. So if we now go across, first of all, there's another little thing to remember, like here are the two most similar species. It doesn't have to be two, it could be a set, but Miranda and Virginiana should be under consideration when you're looking at something you think might be Ceanothene. If we look at what is it that helps create a distinct set of characters, we look at the yellow ones and we see that the fovea, fat to thin ratio, so again, fat is the thickest part, so the greatest width, which would be up towards the ocelli, and the thinnest part would be down near the antennal bases. And in this group, often you can have, and this is an indication for this one, you can have quite a dramatic fat to thin narrowing down in almost like a thought balloon in a way. So this one has a quite dramatic one. So greater than 3. Fovea description, so this is highlighted also, and you can't quite see it there, but if you look up at the top here, it says thin area nearly straight down to slightly bowed. Thin area is very thin and deep, just a slot. So in this particular case, the narrow area, also indicated by it being a roughly a greater than 3-to-1 difference in the ratio, is very narrow and very straight. A lot of them are bowed, and a lot of them are, they're narrower, but not like really, really narrow. So this is when I start using those comparative words, that's problematic, right? You don't really want to have narrower than what, right? So if you have a lot of experience, that makes sense. If you don't, then hopefully some of these other characters that are a little more quantitative, shall we say, and not comparative are useful. Okay, let's look for some more yellow here. And we're not really seeing anything until we get to pitting on T1. So 0.25 to 0.5 pits apart on average. So what that means effectively is like this really got dense pitting on T1. So we're looking for that. And here's just some hints. The distribution is more eastern and northern, I think. And here's a special feature. It's not highlighted, so maybe not one of the ones to use in a definitive sense. Pits on scutum slightly larger than Miranda. So just a tip, something when you're doing comparative work. All right, let's take a look at one, in this case from West Virginia, at a higher elevation. We really don't see this much in Maryland, except in Western Maryland. And we will go here and bring the level down. First, we'll look at some general things on this. They were talking about the pitting on T1. Let's zoom in on T1 here a little bit. And we can see that indeed we do have quite dense pitting throughout this area here. And move that out of my way. So matches T1 has that. We also were looking at fovea characteristics as being part of the identification stream. I moved it pretty quickly, but unlike some of the species, it has big white patches of hair, very dense, very white, and very noticeable on the abdominal sides of the abdominal tergites. Again, that's often not used in a definitive way because it is sometimes difficult to see. Okay, we'll move this around a couple times so you can see this. What you're looking at here is the fovea that's running here, and then there's the bottom part. So here we have very wide, filling up most of the space between the compound eye and the ocelli. And then you can kind of make it out as it crosses underneath the hairs here. This is just a really narrow slot. So that's the ratio is this width at the roughly at the level of the antennal sockets, and the width up here towards the top, or the greatest width, which is up by the ocelli, certainly greater than 3 times wider up here than down there. Let's move this a little, and I'll also explode up this to full height. Let's see, Control, and I think F is the other magic. Oh, that did something, but not what I was expecting. Maybe I have to do in here, Control Shift F. No, Control Alt F. Gosh darn it, what was the... There we go. 4 things I have to press. All right, so here we are. We're looking at the left-hand side now of the face. And the fovea, again, being very useful in this case as a marker for ceanothe. So here we are, very wide at the top. Next down, this is a narrow part of the fovea is a fair distance. We can look on the Excel spreadsheet. We'll flip to here. And if we're at ceanothe again, and we are looking at the this is a character that's useful in many things, but it wasn't highlighted here. So max distance from rim of eye, that's in terms of widths of the fovea at that point. You can see that there is a fair amount of space in there, but it's not monstrously big. And that additionally, this fovea narrow part is basically straight. So in many of the other species, Heraclei, which we'll see in a second, this is bowed, this bottom
Sam,
part.
we just see you right now.
Oh, you do? Okay. Did you see any of that before? Did you see any of the B?
No, it's been you for a while.
Okay, did you see the spreadsheet?
Yes,
Okay. All right, what about now?
we
Do you
got a
see the
B.
B? You have a B. So did you ever see a B or until now or not?
Previously, we did.
Oh, you did.
And then
Okay.
spreadsheet and then talkie face.
All right. Huh, interesting. Okay. So anyway, the issue here is just the shape of the fovea. And we have very wide to very narrow, so that greater than 3 times difference. We have a very straight fovea below, not bent or curved, moderate distance from the rim of the eye, and very crisp in its portrayal. So those are the primary features of this species. And I'm not going to, unless there's questions specifically about each of these, I'm just going to highlight the key features for each. But you can, and this may be where we went wrong. Can you see the spreadsheet now?
We've got it.
Okay, so if we are looking on the spreadsheet for Ceanothene and you're not 100% sure, maybe you're doing your comparison. Remember, we said Miranda and Virginiana, so we can look at Virginiana and look for the differences here with that other one. So, for example, if we go to move that out of the way, we go back to here. I think maybe I clicked on that before. Okay, I'm just talking to myself. So here we can see the difference between, why does that, I don't know, do you see the little icon getting in the way at all? Or is that just something, I see a square with the presentation, Zoom session, shall we call it, jumping around on my screen, but do you see that or do you just
Nope,
see the spreadsheet?
just got
Okay.
your spreadsheet.
All right, it's just my problem then. But if we look here, you can see, oh, this has greater than 3. This is 2, 2, 3. So different, but not greatly different. This is part of this trick. So this one is here. This character is important for Virginiana, but doesn't really differentiate it from the other species. Um, these are absent, also not differentiating Ceanothene. This one also doesn't differentiate Ceanothene, neither does that. The proportion, here we have this thing, right? This is 0.6, this is 0.75. So a little bit more, but not a whole lot. It'd be difficult to see. These don't differentiate. This differentiates. So this would be probably your key character. 1.5 to 3, and this is the pitting on T1. We saw how close it was. This is well spaced out. So that would probably be very, very definitive. And that was it. So
Yeah. For
yeah,
your rim of eye or any of these, the sputum pitting, any of the ones that are really specific, were you using a measuring tool or is this your eyeballing?
eyeball. We don't, in general, our microscopes don't have measuring reticules. And we also are trying to build guides and identification tools that don't require those kinds of things. Those are useful and much more precise. And usually, if you're looking at the literature, you're going to be able to find that kind of thing. But we're trying to reach a broader audience. So we haven't usually included those. Every once in a while, we'll include them, but they're going to be derived from someone else's work. If that sufficiently answers that. I hit the species page
Yep,
again.
it's just trying to remind it.
Okay, so we'll go to Heracles and tell me if the information on the screen disappears again, Claire, and we'll push it back. Okay, so Heraclei, I'm going to remove my Ceanothene here, and we'll look at this one. So in our area, we see Heraclei reasonably regularly. If we're looking at Heraclei we're looking again for a yellow, although we do take a note here and see that the F2 length, it's not highlighted, but it is a bit different, but it includes 1 by 1 there. So maybe not that useful. And whenever did it, we did not think of that as important. This, though, is highlighted entirely smooth and glossy. So what we're looking at is surface below central ocelli. So you know where the central ocelli is, and so below, of course, would be between the antenna and that ocelli. And in this case, it's very smooth and glossy. What else does it say up here? Tiny pits much greater than 1 pit diameter apart versus something that has everything from striations in a few cases to heavily pitted, meaning pits less than 1, and no mention of this smooth and glossy look. So we'll look for that. That's an important one. We're looking at highlighted things and not being distracted by these others that can be used. Now, facial fovea, thin area, strongly bowed. So if we go back up here, strongly bowed in towards the antennae. Okay, remember Ceanothea, the one we just looked at, was essentially straight. This one is highly bowed. And if we look at the distance, which is the next one, and also highlighted, it's 1.2. So, and if we read down here in terms of this is where we explain what the character is talking about, measured in units of the widths of the apex of the scape. So I was wrong in terms of so that the apex of the scape is going to be much more of a uniform across all the species measurement tool than the width of the fovea, which varies and is something that's useful. And we're actually talking about the distance between the eye and the rim. The eye, rim, and the fovea at the level of the antenna. So in this case, very far away, highly bowed, and we'll take a look at that and see if we can the scope a little bit better. We're looking for more yellow areas, skipping over many things. And we see that pitting on T1 also very close, 2.5 to 0.5. And that'll be important in its sister taxa, telling it apart, which has very widely spaced pitting on T1. And note about it being in the mid-Atlantic. It says uncommon. I guess that's maybe true. I thought it was pretty regular in our area, but perhaps not. Okay, let me pull that. Just so people don't think that we are some kind of like magicians and can identify everything. I was just looking at an entire big chunk of Andrena specimens that were labeled Andrena interesting, meaning this is a good specimen, but we have no idea what it is. So Heraclei, let's see if we have a nice looking one here. And how about this one? Just checking on my other thing. Got a lot of pollen on it. Let's try another. How about that one? That seems reasonable. Yeah. And can we see? Yeah, we can see that the face, if the hair is matted quite a bit, this is a generic problem. That's why washing and drying your specimens rather than pulling them out and pinning them up out of alcohol is so much better. If they're matted, a lot of times important features like the facial fovea become obscured. Okay, so we're going to look at the face and we're going to look for this very shiny portion of the head. Okay, so hopefully we're seeing the microscope screen here. And Claire will mention if it...
We have it.
All right, not there. And so we're zooming in on the head, and what we're going to do is look at the area, and we'll go when we go to the next specimen, or we'll mention this again, but we're looking in this area. This is not showing up super well. And it's smooth and glossy. Let's see if I'll try and get another specimen on this one. And we'll take a look at the fovea too. It may be so glossy, we're getting a lot of sheen coming in. This might be a better view, a little bit better. But the fact that we're getting so much reflectance is an indicator of how smooth the area is. I have a feeling a different specimen will show this better. And the pitting, so this is the area here. It's again a little hard to see, but you can see that there is a fair amount of spacing between the pits. In other words, not on top of each other. Again, we'll try and get another one to show this. Visual fovea, here's the upper part, here's the lower part, fat, skinny, pretty distinctive. And here's this bow. Okay, so here's this distance, and we're looking at this scape as a measurement. It's a little, we have a parallax problem here with the microscope to really use that, but we're using the apex of the first segment of the antenna to measure this distance, but this is bowed away and quite a distance. Let's see if we can see that better on the other side. We can see that pretty well. So here's what we're looking at. So here's the upper part, so the wide part, here's the narrow part, and you can see that it bends away from the rim of the eye, and you have quite a big space between there. So that's part of the distinctive features. And the other distinctive feature was a pretty close spacing. I want to say it's Hippodes or the other species has a bit of association with wetlands, but I'm not, maybe even willow. Can't quite remember, but is close pitting. So if we look at this, bring it up a little bit, you can see that the pits are quite close, very similar-ish to, maybe not quite as closely pitted as Ceanothera, but quite dense. And then if we look at T2, which wasn't one of the features, but I do want to point this out as useful many times, is you can see the oppressed area, so the depressed part of the rim goes way the heck up there. And you can see that if we're measuring these relative distances, that we might say 80%, maybe even a little bit more of the total length of this rim is in the depressed state. Look at the bright, shiny side patches of apical hair bands. Let's see what we have here again. So we're on the row with Heraclei. And so smooth and glossy again. And if we look at some of these other features, what was it that we were noting? What's the oppressed area? I like looking at the oppressed area. It says actually 75%, we could see that plus or minus. And here's my notes about the hair bands. It says none too vague and thin, and then a side note, maybe dense at times, question mark. So, and then here's the tight pitting. So in some of these kinds of situations, is there regional variation, or was that where, or are we looking at more than one species and we're not differentiating them well because it's very messy? Hard to say, but we are very close right now. I'm going to pull another specimen. We're very close right now to having a molecular capabilities with nanopore technology to begin actually doing some species stuff. This one's a little dirty again. That one's more like 75%. Let's see what I can find. Look at that head feature again. This is pretty good. And yeah. Always more to learn on bees in terms of where they occur, plants they occur on, and patterns. And it's made so much more tricky when they're difficult to identify. So sometimes you get information about a species, but it's actually not that species. Which is why we're doing these classes, so that you aren't propagating misidentifications. Where's my little there we go. All right, so we're going to zoom in on the head again from this far up. Let's see if we can really, can't quite, well, you can a little bit. So here's this bent part. So where we have the curve showing up in terms of the dark patches away from the fovea, which is highly bent at the lower part. And the upper part, you maybe get a hint that you're seeing some glossy areas. But again, we're getting so much reflection from here that it's obscuring some of what's going on. I'll try and zoom all the way up that I can. And the pitting, so if you look up here, you can see that there's sections. It doesn't look like it's generic everywhere, but a lot of these sections that the pitting is about 1 apart. Maybe that's not the best character. And you can't really see this glossy nature of this area really well. So I apologize for that. It is, though, noticeable under the microscope. We'll look here at the fovea. This happens all the time, right? There's these long hairs and they flop over the fovea. You can see that this distance here is not like Ceanothene, which was much narrower, but there is quite an extensive area because this curves up that is just integument, not fovea. Let's look on the other side. A different angle. And we can get this impression again too. Here's a narrow fovea. Here, this fovea curves away. You can see the relative distances between the eye rim and the fovea varies, but at its greatest maximum, there's quite a gap. And if you think about many other Andrena, they largely follow the edge of that rim. There's really not all this variation going on. And T1, we don't need to look at that again. Maybe it'll zoom out, but I'm going to focus on T1 from here. But you get the point. We saw it the last one. T1, heavily pitted. Feel free to interrupt about individual species if you have questions. Otherwise, we're just going to go through each. I may not have all the species here, but if we go to Hippodes, oops, darn it, keep clicking that thing. We go to Hippodes and we go back and we look for the special thing. The special thing is essentially orange, tibia and tarsal segments. Really shows up in the males too. It's one of the few Trachandrena that I feel comfortable naming. And here under special features, oppressed areas of tergites, sometimes, what does it say up here? Sometimes with very sparse pitting. I don't know if that's just something I noted and put here as a note. The key thing is this orangish color. And this is a relatively common species. Let's see if I have that. Got a specimen out. Blowing the nose off screen.
What did you say?
I was blowing my nose off screen. I think this isn't some high
Oh,
class
great.
video. And at least I did it off screen. Okay, so let's see if we can find this one. Looks good. So yeah, these are sometimes a very dominant member of the area. I think we'll start with the face because we've been looking at some facial features, and this has a pretty generic for the group, and we can look at some of the might be a little bit tricky on the specimen. We can look at some of the features that contrast with the last two. We can get to it. Okay, so recall that the other one we were making statements about the pits being a little bit wider than others, and that it was shiny and glossy and smooth. And this is pretty typical of almost all the others. There's one other species that fits that shiny thing. And I'm afraid it just doesn't show well under the microscope setup that we are running. And plus there's, oops, antennal segments and things in the way. Let's see if I can get that back. There we go. But if you, and again, I'll point this out several times because it is an important key character and is one of those things that you know it when you see it, but a lot of times if you don't see a Hippodes or its other species counterpart whose name I forget, you tend to try and make some of the ones that don't have glossy areas into it. So here you can see a bit into that interior space where there's a lot of pits, there's some surface sculpturing going on. It's really not just highly reflective. So, you know, it's like a lot of this stuff on the back of the head too is pretty much the same. And we'll look at more, but in this area in particular is where we're looking below the central ocelli and above the antennal segments. On that, now let's take a look at the facial fovea as a contrast on here, and you can see here's the fat area, here's the thin area, and here is the edge of the eye. And first of all, the thin area is not so thin, right? So I don't know what we put down there, but it's, you know, maybe if to be generous, maybe if, and again, we may have a partially obscured specimen only twice the this is twice the width of that down there, and there's almost no distance between the rim of the eye and the lower part of the facial fovea, unlike the last specimen that we looked at. So now the super nice to have character on this species are the orange legs, and you can see them right from here. And it's not a subtle character. It is orange. And we'll look at it maybe from the side too. And so the tarsal segments, including the basotarsus, which the X is on right now, and the tibia are just plain old orange. And the hairs are light. They're not really orange, but the integument is orange. And so that shows up nicely. You can see here some pretty generic other characteristics. These are close, but not super close, pitting on T1. The oppressed area, kind of difficult to see from this angle, but you're in the ballpark of 60, 70% perhaps. Bright white edges in this species in terms of tergal hair bands. And I am going to pop in a male. So at this point, early on when we were doing these guides, and just identifying things. I just was having so much trouble finding good specimens of the males that I could trust. And the differences between them are even more subtle, in my mind at least, that I tended to not identify them, just leave them as Trachandrena species because they're pretty easy to identify at the Trachandrena level. And I'm trying to get a good specimen here of a male. But in Hapotes, you get, a orangish coloration in here, particularly in the here, this shows it pretty well in the tarsal segments, particularly the basotarsus. That said, there is, so this is a male. It does have the classic Trachandrena propodial triangle with the raised line or carina across the tip that separates it from the vertical face. And here you can see in particular, this is smudgily yellow at the apical end and the basal end, and a little bit of brown in the middle, but this is clearly all orangey yellow. I should say orange instead of yellow. Here's coming into my eye myself. And so that gives you a strong IDQ for that one. So that's one that they usually co-occur and they're usually quite common. I'm going to try and get this specimen back in the camera and zoom in to show the propodial triangle, which is the strong identification characteristic for the group. But you have to be aware of elysis. So I think we do the separation in there. Elysis can also have this propodial triangle raised line separating the rear area. There's a raised line separating this upper surface, the dorsal surface, from the not so much the ventral, but the rear facing surface of the propodium that is facing T1. Not a great look because of how dark it is in there, but
Hey, Sam.
Yeah.
Elysis is not included on your spreadsheet. So if when you're talking, like, we want to go over it after this, that might be a good
Okay.
idea.
We can. I probably, even though it's not a Trachandrena, unless I'm grossly mistaken, it is something that has to be separated out from the Trachandrena because it has a character here. And also, it's going to match in terms of orange leggedness, the Hapotes. Off the top of my head, I can't remember how I know it's not that species or is that species. And I do know that a lot of times I end up looking it up because I'm not sure. It's a woodland. I associate it with woodland species. Okay.
The Elysis or Hapotes?
Elysis. Hapotes, I see just in lots of areas. I think of it as open country. A lot of these Trachandrena are later in the season than many of the other Andrena species. These tend to be early spring, found in woodlands. Some of these can be found in woodlands, but a lot of these are open country species and can bleed right into August. When certainly a number of them are solid summer species, which is unusual. Which are that I'm not 100% sure. But you can look up things online. Okay, so this next one is oops, I keep clicking this species, but okay, it didn't kick me out. Marie is a willow specialist, and in the Midwest, and I guess maybe the high plains to the west of that, it's pretty clear to identify because it has a nice orangey red abdomen. But in the east, like the ones that I have identified, at least tentatively, don't have that. And this is noted in LaBerge, who did the revision, or LaBerge's students, I forget who did Trachandrena. Let's see if I can find it. And so it makes it one that, because of this in-between nature of having a dark abdomen sometimes and a red abdomen other times, something that can trick you up, particularly if you're in an area where you have a lot of the red abdomen action. So I do have a red abdomen one here. So I'm going to bring it out to show what that looks like. And there it is. It is very red. And it would have the other characters. It would be like, it's like Sphecotes red. But it has Andrena characteristics, wing venation and facial foveas and all that kind of good stuff. And if we look back here on the propodial triangle, again, in so here's a triangle right here, pretty nicely outlined. And you can see a character that's used sometimes is how different is the surface sculpturing between the area interior to the triangle and exterior to the triangle. And in this particular case, how much time do we have left? 140. Okay. So there's not a whole lot of difference. So just pointing that out, I'm not sure that's a key character here, but sometimes you'll see this line very crisp. This area tends to be always like this. So relatively large open cells defined by raised lines. And this area can be very tightly knotted up with just sort of a jumble of hills and valleys forming just a rough surface. And other times it's like this, or they're, kind of look about the same. But here we go. So back to the case at point. This one, pretty easy to do. We can identify, here's this carina at the tip. So it's a Trachandrena. And here is this nice red abdomen. It must be Marie. And if it was on a willow, like game over, you've got that. But the problem is sometimes they're brown. So I'm going to pull the specimen. And actually, let's go back and look at the characteristics here other than the red. So if we're looking at this, we're looking for the yellow highlighted, and I would have highlighted it for not just, if it was always red, then that's all you need to highlight. This case, sometimes it's brown, so there's more to highlight to help separate it. So clear striations with only vague pits. So that's different from most. So most of them don't have striations on the section below the ocelli. They have some kind of pitting pattern or even a glossy area. Fat to thin, not very differentiated. Okay, so recall Ceanothene greater than 3 times wider at the top than at the bottom. Here, it's only 1.25 to 1.75. So really not a whole lot. It doesn't widen as it goes towards the apex of the head much at all. So that's highlighted as a important feature. And so border a propodial triangle, it says present and clear. I don't think I saw that in that red one very well, but perhaps we didn't have quite the angle on it. We'll pull that back up. It's still on there. And then outside much finer than inside. Again, I didn't really see that either. And then the tergites, in this case, were orangish, but in other cases, not. It says orangish to dark brown. So that'd be the same. And pitting on T1, moderate, 1 to 3. And then again, this note here, Eastern individuals tend toward brown abdomens. So let's look at the specimen, the red specimen again to see if the alignment of some of these things occurs in terms of pitting and head patterns. So we go back here to the fovea. Let's look at that. So what we're looking for is not a whole lot of difference in relative widths. And take this back down, bring the specimen into view. I'm going to change the angle a little bit. And oh, the fovea are very nicely defined in this picture. And you can see that this is not as wide as others. In other words, it's not really mashing in against the lateral ocelli. This line is hardly moving away from the edge of the eye at all. And this fovea is narrower, but we saw on the spreadsheet that the difference was 1.25 to 1.75. So almost approaching 2, but you can see that the relative difference in the widths is not very great. So that's a match. Oh, here, if we look up here again, so what we're looking for here is actual striations. So this is a good shot. So you can see these, this pattern, this linearity, this, call it striations, if you will, in the raised areas. Let's see if I can get even further up there. Not necessarily great in this area. So you can't really even see pits. What you're seeing is a striate area. But as you've been looking, as we've been talking, that is true. If you had a whole series of these and you had all the species and you were doing comparison, yes, that's great. But if you just had one specimen, you might be, trying to second guess yourself. And that's why we did this particular approach on this with this spreadsheet, because it's so comparative in some ways. But anyway, striate area without any obvious pitting. And then I believe we go next to the propodial triangle and look at some features there. And we're going to do this again, but without a nice, bright, shiny red abdomen. If we have this red abdomen, it's really, we don't need to go through very far, although it's always good to do double checking on other characters too. But over time, it's only so many hours in a day. All right, so in the propodial triangle, we'll go back here and see what it says. So we took care of the facial fovea thing. So it says border present and clear, and outside much finer than inside. Well, I guess that is the last view. This is the same specimen. It didn't seem to be that different, and I still would argue that that outside isn't that much finer than the inside. But if we look over in this direction, it seems to be more the case. Again, looking at these things under the microscope can be misleading. So I can see the point there. So I can see the boundary. This looks pretty similar out here, but it might again be easier to see if I was looking under the microscope. Okay, so I'm going to go jump to now a brown specimen from the region here. And although, do I have a brown specimen? Should. Oh, here's a brown specimen without a head. some reason. And what about this one? Oh, here's a brown specimen with a head. All right. So where did this come from? Well, it has a question mark next to it as to its validity as Marie A, but we now, having looked at our red specimens and do an evaluation of the brown specimen and see if it gives us satisfaction. Trachandrenas are pretty fun, you know, in terms of like, there are a whole series of characters, even if they're sort of blendy. And after some experience, it's like, okay, I could see that. So in this case, it's a little bit, the angle is a little bit odd. This fovea is not showing up as brightly as this, but you can see that this distance and this distance are relatively close compared to some of those others. So we're going to check that box. Now here, this is where the area below the ocelli should be striate. Let's see, and there should be very little pitting obvious. Well, first off, I see pitting, and so that doesn't really match. This may be why this is a question mark specimen. On that other one, it was like pretty clear there were no pits, and you could really see, I mean, if you crossed your eyes, you could perhaps see that there's some linearity, but the other one clearly had that. This does not. So this decreases my belief in this one, but it was listed as a question mark. Perhaps for good reason. Now, going to the propodial triangle area, we should see a sharp line. First of all, vibe-wise, this propodial triangle vibes very differently than the other one. And it is, and the other one had that red abdomen, which is sort of a tell. So here, look at how big and different the cells are versus the outside of the cells. So we do have this clearly demarcated situation. Here you can very nicely see the carina that separates the dorsal surface from this vertical surface facing. So here is the rest of the propodial triangle coming down, but this vertical carina, or this little carina, this raised line on the edge, is so distinct in this one. Now, so this is very distinct, and this is clearly a lot denser and finer in its granularity than this, and this has quite large, bold things. So it doesn't look like the other one in terms of, it's not just like, this is something painted brown, not red. So it's good to leave it as a question mark in this particular case, because it does look like something different. And these are the kinds of things that everyone pulls their hair out over. But cross our fingers, we hope to be doing more molecular things in the future. Don't get in touch with us yet, but maybe in the future, we'll be asking you for your mystery stuff so we can, you know, continue looking at these nuances. We'll do runs of hopefully many groups of species. Okay, so what time do we have, Claire? Do we have time for another or not?
It is 1:58.
Okay, well, let's go. So we won't do another one, but let's go back to our spreadsheet, and we will, you know,
Want to try to figure out what that one actually is?
No, not you know, I could, but it would be a whole lot of me talking to myself, looking at things. We could do that at the end, to go back to that as a thing. But, you know, there are many things here to look at. So I think I would rather, continue talking about each of these so we get a visual and get a look, feel for those, and then we can go back and do that one and see if we can come up with an answer. But there's all these different columns to associate with, and think about it would be a good several minutes to floss that one into submission, and maybe we couldn't. So that's the delightful part of doing bees. Many times you can't be absolute about it. So I think that's a good place. You see, even though we had covered the basics with Forbesii, we did not even get halfway through the rest. So, but we'll make it through. This is why we do these classes. Questions, comments, things you'd like to see done differently? Any notions?
Nothing in the chat. Unmute if you got it.
I'm going to stop sharing. That button says stop sharing. There we go. So, yeah.
Well, fantastic. Very efficient. I reached out to Rob and Mike, so maybe they'll join us. This will be a long series with Andrena. But if not, we'll pick up at Miranda.
All right. And then one of these days, Nomada and Sphecodes.
Well, we need to also go back and finish Dialectus. We gave Joel a break, but maybe they'll come back.
Oh my gosh, so much to do. It's like there's hundreds of species or something.
Wild. It's so weird. All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.